What if the biggest political story of the year is not what actually happened, but what both sides needed you to think happened? Because when you look at the real timeline, the financial moves, the military doctrine, and the one quote from an American senator that almost nobody is discussing, a completely different picture starts to form. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Stay with me because this one is going to change how you read every Middle East headline from this point forward. And before we go any further, if you are the kind of person who wants to understand what is actually happening in the world beneath the surface level news coverage, hit that subscribe button right now, share this video with one person who you think deserves to know the real story, and drop a like so more people can find this content. It genuinely helps. Now let us get into it. On June 8th, 2026, Donald Trump gave an interview to the Financial Times. In that interview, he said something very specific and very confident. He said, Netanyahu will have no choice, I call the shots, he is not the decision maker. Those were his exact words. Bold words. The kind of words that make it sound like Washington has complete and total control over what Israel does and does not do in the Middle East. And then, 3 hours later, Israel launched dozens of fighter jets and struck military facilities deep inside Iranian territory. 3 hours after Trump said he calls the shots. The White House said absolutely nothing. No confirmation, no denial, no press briefing, just silence. And within minutes, news outlets around the world ran the exact same story. Trump has been humiliated. Netanyahu defied America. Israel is doing whatever it wants. Democratic Senator Chris Murphy jumped on social media and wrote that this war had been deeply humiliating for Trump and for American power in general. That is the story. The small country outsmarts the superpower. The underdog outmaneuvers the giant. It is a clean, satisfying narrative, and it spread everywhere instantly. But here is the thing. Clean narratives that spread everywhere instantly are usually the ones most worth questioning. So today, I want to do something different. I want to put 3 completely different explanations on the table for the exact same set of events. We are going to look at each one honestly, using real data, real sources, and a real timeline. And at the end, I want you to decide which one actually explains everything. Not just most things, everything. Let us start with the first explanation, which is the one dominating mainstream media right now. The idea is simple. Israel controls America, not the other way around. The small actor is pulling the strings of the bigger actor. Think of it like a dog and a tail. Normally, the dog is in control and the tail just follows, but sometimes that relationship flips. In this case, the theory says Netanyahu is smarter and more determined than Trump. Israel has its own agenda, and when Trump personally called Netanyahu and told him not to strike Iran, Netanyahu ignored him completely. And this was not even the first time. The week before, Trump had another phone call with Netanyahu that by his own admission did not go well. Trump reportedly cursed at Netanyahu because of Israeli operations in Lebanon. The President of the United States swearing at the Israeli Prime Minister over the phone. And you have to understand the domestic political pressure Netanyahu was under. His main political rival, former Prime Minister Naftali Bennett, publicly stated that if Netanyahu followed Trump's wishes and held back, it would prove that Israel was no longer a sovereign nation. That is devastating for a leader heading into a competitive election. Netanyahu needed to look strong, independent, and completely immune to foreign pressure. So the argument goes he had every reason to ignore Trump. He had a history of doing exactly that. And the facts on the surface seem to confirm it. Trump said stop. Netanyahu did not stop. Case closed, right? Not quite, because here is the question that breaks this entire narrative open. If America genuinely wanted to stop Israel, why did it not use any of its actual leverage? America supplies Israel with nearly its entire advanced weapons arsenal, precision-guided bombs, cruise missiles, bunker busters. America operates the air defense systems protecting Israeli skies. American Aegis destroyers sit in the eastern Mediterranean, feeding real-time tracking data to Israeli defense networks. American intelligence helps Israel plan its strike missions. All America had to do was pause any one of those things, just one. And the June 8th operation could not have happened the way it did, but America paused none of them, not one. Even after Israel had supposedly embarrassed the American president in front of the entire world, full military support continued without interruption. You do not keep fully protecting someone who just humiliated you on a global stage unless the humiliation was part of the plan. And this is where the second explanation becomes far more interesting. What if America is not being outsmarted by Israel at all? What if America is deliberately using Israel as a regional instrument to carry out strategic objectives that Washington cannot or will not pursue directly? When American and Israeli interests perfectly align, Washington steps aside and lets Israel act. And the public theater of disagreement, Trump saying do not do it, Netanyahu doing it anyway, that theater gives America the political cover it needs. America gets to look like the responsible peacemaker while still achieving its military and geopolitical goals in the region. Same outcome, completely different story for public consumption. 5 independent sources, none of them from Iran or Russia, support this view, and I want you to pay attention to where these sources are coming from. The first is a Washington-based organization called DAWN, Democracy for the Arab World Now. They concluded that American policy has transformed Israel into what they describe directly as a regional proxy force, and that the operations Israel carries out in the region are functionally indistinguishable from American operations because Israel is executing American strategic objectives. The difference is that no American soldiers are dying in the process. The second source is Al-Shabaka, an international Palestinian policy network, which argued that this conflict is not accidental and not a product of Israeli manipulation of America. They called it the product of a deliberate long-term strategy, a joint project designed to eliminate resistance forces and reshape the entire Middle Eastern region. The third source is the one that stopped me in my tracks when I first read it. United States Senator Lindsey Graham, one of the most senior voices in American foreign policy, said this publicly, on the record, with evident pride. He said that controlling 31% of the world's oil reserves from Iran and Venezuela would be, in his words, a massively profitable investment, and he called that scenario China's nightmare. Let that sit for a moment. An American senator openly told the world that the real strategic goal of this conflict is not stopping nuclear weapons and not protecting democracy. It is controlling 31% of global oil and creating what he personally called China's nightmare. That quote should be on the front page of every newspaper in the world. It is not. The fourth source, the electronic intifada, made the point that destroying Iran weakens both Russia and China simultaneously. Iran is a critical strategic partner for Russia in the region. Iran is one of China's most important energy suppliers. If Iran collapses, both Beijing and Moscow lose a strategic ally, a regional foothold, and a key energy node at the same time. That is not a side effect of this conflict. According to these analysts, that is the entire point. The fifth source, Medical International, a German international health and human rights organization, offered perhaps the bluntest assessment. They wrote that after clearing Gaza, after weakening Hezbollah in Lebanon, and after ending the Assad government in Syria, this moment represents the perfect strategic window for the United States and Israel to reshape the entire Middle East in their shared favor. This is not part 1 of something new. This is part 5 of something long planned. Now let us talk about the actual timeline of June 7th because this is where things get genuinely extraordinary, and it is the part that almost no major news network has fully connected together. 3 separate events happened on that single day, and they are almost never discussed as a unified picture. First, that morning, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent invoked the International Emergency Economic Powers Act to seize between $12 and $24 billion of frozen Iranian assets. That money was earmarked to compensate Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Kuwait for war damages. Now, why does this matter beyond just the money? Because for weeks leading up to this, Iran had been communicating through the Pakistani diplomatic channel that it had one single non-negotiable condition for any peace agreement: release our frozen assets. That was the only door leading to any diplomatic resolution. On the morning of June 7th, America did not just refuse to open that door. It locked it, sealed it, and handed the key to Riyadh. Iran's deputy foreign minister responded immediately, stating that Iranian assets are not war spoils to be redistributed, and Iran froze the diplomatic channel entirely. On that same morning, the Financial Times published Trump's interview in which he claimed to be very close to a deal with Iran. On the same day you destroy the foundation of any possible deal, you tell the world you are almost finished with the deal. That is not a contradiction. That is a performance designed for different audiences simultaneously. Second event. That same afternoon, Israel struck the Dahieh neighborhood in southern Beirut. 2 people killed, 11 wounded. Here is the detail that changes everything. 5 days before that strike, exactly 5 days, Iran's Khatam al-Anbiya central headquarters issued a public warning in 3 languages: Hebrew, Farsi, and Arabic. The warning stated clearly that any Israeli strike on Dahieh would immediately trigger Operation True Promise 5. 3 languages, 5 days in advance, broadcast widely. Iran could not have made the red line more visible. Israel crossed it anyway. Third event. Saudi Arabian television channel Al Hadath reported that Israel had coordinated the Beirut strike with the United States in advance. American officials did not confirm this. They also did not deny it. In diplomacy, a deliberate non-denial is itself a statement. If the report were false, the White House would have issued an immediate denial. That is standard procedure. They did not issue one. So on a single day, you have America economically closing the only door to negotiations, Israel militarily crossing the red line that Iran had announced publicly 5 days earlier, and evidence of prior American and Israeli coordination that Washington never bothered to dispute. These are not 3 separate news stories. They are 3 branches of one plan. Now here is the dimension that pulls everything together, and this is the part I find most fascinating from a purely strategic standpoint. Why did Iran retaliate so fast? Israel struck Beirut in the afternoon of June 7th. Within just a few hours, not the next day, not after a cabinet meeting, within hours, Iran's Revolutionary Guard had already launched multiple waves of ballistic missiles at the Ramat David Air Base in northern Israel. For any country to make the decision to fire ballistic missiles at another country normally requires cabinet consultations, briefings with senior leadership, diplomatic consequence assessments, and operational planning. That process takes days at minimum. Iran did it in hours. Why? The answer lies in a military doctrine called mosaic defense. Iran does not rely on a single centralized command structure for military decisions. Instead, it operates through 31 provincial Revolutionary Guard commands, each of which has what military strategists call pre-delegated authority. This means each command is authorized in advance to initiate strikes independently the moment a pre-specified trigger condition is confirmed. Think of it this way. Imagine 31 guards stationed at 31 separate locations, and the general already told every single one of them that if a specific alarm sounds, you do not call me, you do not ask permission, you act immediately. That is mosaic defense. What made Operation True Promise 5 different from all the previous operations is that for the first time in Iranian military history, the trigger was pre-announced publicly. The Khatam al-Anbiya command published the exact condition 5 days in advance in 3 languages. So when the Provincial Revolutionary Guard commands received confirmation that Israel had struck Dahieh, they did not consult Tehran. They did not wait for authorization. The confirmation of the trigger event was itself the standing order. They fired automatically, exactly as advertised. And here is the implication that I want you to sit with. If Iran's retaliation was automatic, and everyone knew it would be automatic because Iran announced it 5 days in advance in 3 languages, then both the United States and Israel knew with complete certainty what would happen the moment they authorized the Beirut strike. They knew Iran would fire. Israel would then have full justification to escalate directly into Iranian territory. And American Aegis destroyers in the Eastern Mediterranean would collect real-time combat data on Iran's actual remaining missile capabilities during a live wartime engagement. This matters because of what Trump told the public. On June 7th, Trump said on NBC News that Iran's military had been destroyed, that Iran retained only around 21 or 22% of its pre-war missile stockpile. His words were that they had totally destroyed Iran's military, but classified American intelligence assessments reportedly put Iran's actual remaining missile capability at 70%. 70, not 21. When Iran fired 10 or more ballistic missiles in 3 waves at Ramat David, American and Israeli systems were feeding live tracking data back through the integrated air defense network. Both sides were collecting real performance data from a real engagement. Iran was essentially being used as a live fire test case for that integrated defense architecture, and Iran did not fully understand that when it pulled the trigger. Now let me build the third and final explanation, because this is where every single thread we have covered today connects into one coherent picture. I call this the theater of consent. The core idea is this. When 2 actors share the same strategic goal but need to project completely different public images for completely different audiences, they will stage a visible disagreement while privately remaining coordinated. Think about what each side needed from this situation. Trump needed to look like the peacemaker, the responsible deal-maker trying to prevent escalation. He needed that image for American voters who are exhausted by military conflict, for Wall Street investors nervous about oil prices, and for NATO allies demanding stability. He had to be visibly seen calling Netanyahu and saying, "Do not do this." He had to be seen being defied. That sequence gave him exactly the public image he needed. Netanyahu needed the exact opposite image. He needed to look like the sovereign warrior who answers to nobody, who makes decisions based purely on Israeli national interest regardless of what any foreign leader says. He needed that image for Israeli voters heading into a competitive election, and he needed to shut down Naftali Bennett, who was already questioning Israeli sovereignty publicly. So when Trump said, "I call the shots," and Netanyahu attacked anyway, what actually happened is that Trump got the footage and the quotes that the American media needed to show his peace effort. Netanyahu got the footage and the quotes that the Israeli media needed to show his independence, and the attack happened exactly as both sides required. Both actors got precisely what they needed from a single sequence of events. The theater served both audiences at the same time. And underneath that theater, American Aegis destroyers were still tracking Iranian missiles. American intelligence was still providing Israeli strike planning support. American naval forces were still enforcing the blockade that neutralized Iran's economic leverage. The visible disagreement was the mechanism for public consumption. The strategic coordination was the substance underneath. So when you look at all of this together, the $24 billion of Iranian assets seized on the morning of June 7th, closing the only path to negotiations, Israel crossing the publicly announced red line that same afternoon, 31 Revolutionary Guard commands firing automatically within hours, exactly as pre-announced. Over 10 ballistic missiles targeting Ramat David in 3 waves, while American and Israeli systems collected live combat data. The White House staying completely silent and never once denying prior coordination. Full American military support continuing without pause after the supposed humiliation, and Senator Lindsey Graham openly declaring that the real goal is to control 31% of global oil and create what he called China's nightmare. One question becomes impossible to avoid. If Netanyahu was genuinely defying Trump, why did every single American action on June 7th and 8th serve Washington's long-term strategic interests perfectly? Seizing Iranian assets serves American interests. Triggering Iran's automatic retaliation generates escalation justification that serves American interests. Collecting live Iranian missile performance data serves American interests for whatever comes next. Degrading Iranian energy infrastructure serves American interests. This pattern is not the result of chaos or miscommunication. This level of consistent alignment across multiple independent actions on a single day is the result of coordination. And the Lindsey Graham quote, 31% of global oil, China's nightmare. That is not a strategic slip. That is the footnote that Washington accidentally left in plain view. The goal is not Iran's nuclear program. The goal is not Israeli security in the narrow sense. The goal is to control the energy architecture of the entire Middle East, to weaken the supply lines that both Russia and China depend on, and to accomplish all of it using Israel as the forward operating instrument while maintaining the fiction of American distance and Israeli independence. Now let me give you 3 specific things to watch for because a good theory should make predictions. You can actually test against reality. Watch the IRGC statements directly, not through CNN or Fox, but the actual statements. The Revolutionary Guard described Operation True Promise 5 as a controlled warning shot with a specific condition attached. If Israel stops striking Lebanese territory, particularly Dahiyeh, Iran stops. If Israel continues, the Mosaic defense structure automatically triggers the next sequence with no authorization required from Tehran. Watch whether Israel actually slows its operations in Lebanon. That single indicator will tell you more about whether Washington genuinely wants de-escalation than any press briefing ever will. Watch what the White House does not say. If America was genuinely surprised and humiliated by Netanyahu, the State Department or National Security Council would issue a formal, explicit, on-record statement clearly saying they had no advance knowledge of the Beirut strike and did not coordinate on the June 8th Iranian operation. If that statement does not appear, silence in diplomacy is never accidental. Silence is consent and always has been. Watch the oil markets and the treasury markets together. Senator Graham told you the end game himself. Control the energy, create China's nightmare. If Iran loses its ability to threaten the Strait of Hormuz, track carefully who benefits. Not Israel, not Saudi Arabia. The beneficiary is the petrodollar system. The beneficiary is the flow of global capital back into American treasury bonds. The beneficiary is Washington's ability to service its debt at favorable rates. Follow the money because money does not lie the way press conferences do. Here is what I want to leave you with. Mainstream media keeps asking one question. Who is controlling whom, Israel or America? But that question assumes the two sides are actually in conflict and that one of them must be winning. The more useful question, the one that actually explains the data we covered today, is this. Why do both sides need the world to believe they are in conflict? And who specifically benefits when we believe that story? Look at the IEP timing. Look at the Mosaic defense tripwire that Iran pre-announced in 3 languages. Look at the Lindsey Graham oil quote. Look at the White House silence. Look at the uninterrupted American military support immediately after the supposed humiliation. When you sit with all of that data and you ask the right question instead of the comfortable one, you start to see something that the nightly news is structurally not designed to show you. If anything in this video made you think differently about how you read geopolitical news, share it with someone who deserves to think differently too. Leave your honest reaction in the comments because the only way any of us gets closer to the truth is through genuine disagreement and better evidence. I want to be challenged. I want you to bring a fact I missed or an argument I have not considered. That is how this works. I will see you in the next one.